It was a regular evening at one of the city's most expensive hotels. Laughter echoed in the hallways. Waiters moved in perfect rhythm, and the air smelled like money. Mr. Raymond Carter, a 58-year-old self-made millionaire, was hosting a private business dinner. Power suits, champagne flutes, and conversations worth millions. Nothing could go wrong until something did. In the middle of his speech, Raymond clutched his chest. His face turned pale, his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. Panic spread like wildfire. Phones fumbled from hands, people froze in disbelief. Someone screamed, "Call an ambulance!" Another shouted, "Is there a doctor here?" But no one moved. Everyone was either too scared or too unsure, until a voice came from the crowd, firm, clear. "Calm down. I'm a doctor." Heads turned. It wasn't a man in a white coat. It wasn't a guest in designer clothes. It was a young woman, barely in her 20s, wearing faded jeans, a coffee-stained apron, and shoes that had seen better days. She knelt beside him with steady hands, checked his pulse, tilted his head, and started CPR without hesitation. The crowd stood stunned. Some whispered, "Who is she? Can we trust her? She doesn't look like a doctor." But she didn't wait for permission. Her hands moved in rhythm, her voice calm but urgent. "Sir, stay with me. You're going to be okay. Just breathe with me." Minutes felt like hours. The hotel staff finally brought aspirin. She placed it under his tongue and continued compressions. By the time the paramedics arrived, Raymond had a heartbeat again. Weak, but there. The EMT looked at the girl and asked, "What's your name, doctor?" She paused, took a deep breath, and softly said, "I'm not a doctor." Not yet. Before the apron, before the kitchen shifts, before anyone questioned her place in that hotel, Sarah was just a little girl with big brown eyes and dreams far taller than her height. She didn't grow up with much. Her world was small, a cramped one-room apartment on the edge of the city, where the fan didn't always work and the floor always creaked when you walked. But for Sarah, that room was a universe. Because her mother was in it. Her mother was her everything: nurse, teacher, bedtime storyteller, and sometimes even Santa Claus when Sarah's slippers had holes and winters were too long. She didn't know what poverty was until she started school and saw other kids with lunch boxes that zipped open like treasure chests. Sarah's lunch? 2 slices of dry bread wrapped in newspaper, sometimes with sugar, sometimes with just a prayer, but she never complained. Not once, because every night her mother sat her down and said, "We don't have much, Sarah, but we have each other. And your mind? That's your magic. You take care of it, and it will take you far." And so Sarah read everything she could find, from old library books to torn newspapers from the fruit stand. She once read a science book without a cover, and didn't even know it was meant for college students. She just loved learning. But it wasn't just learning that made her different. It was what she saw. When she was 10, her neighbor Uncle Rahim collapsed one afternoon. Chest pain, sweating, gasping, his wife screamed for help. People stood around, helpless and scared. No one knew what to do. The ambulance came late. Too late. Sarah watched from behind a broken gate, clutching her school bag to her chest, and wondering, what if someone had known what to do? Could he have lived? That night she asked her mother, "What makes a doctor?" "A doctor?" Her mother smiled sadly and replied, "A doctor knows how to save. But more importantly, a doctor wants to." Sarah never forgot those words. From that day, her dream had a name. She didn't want to be rich. She didn't want a white coat. She wanted to be someone who knew how to save. She told everyone at school, "I'll be a doctor one day." Some laughed. Some rolled their eyes. Even teachers gave her the look, the kind that says, "That's sweet, but let's be realistic." But Sarah didn't need their belief. She had her mother's, and that was enough. When she turned 14, her mother fell sick. It started small: dizziness, coughing, fatigue. Clinics gave random pills and told her to rest. No one investigated. No one really listened. They couldn't afford tests. So they tried home remedies, prayers, warm soups, borrowed medicine. But deep down, Sarah knew something was wrong. She started reading medical books from secondhand shops. She wrote notes in cheap notebooks. And each night, as her mother lay coughing, Sarah sat by her side, not crying, but learning. One day she whispered, "I promise, Mama. One day I'll be a real doctor, and I'll make sure no one waits this long for help again." Her mother smiled weakly, eyes tired but full of belief. "You already are one, my love. Here." She placed her hand over Sarah's heart. That moment was the beginning, not of her career, but of her calling. The girl with no lunch money, no father, no backup plan had found a purpose bigger than her pain, and she would chase it with everything she had. Soft emotional music begins to rise. Little did she know that path would not be straight, not fair and not kind, but it would lead her exactly where she needed to be. Sarah's letter of acceptance arrived on a rainy afternoon. The envelope was soaked, but the ink inside was dry sharp, clear and life-changing. "Congratulations. You've been selected for a full academic scholarship to the state medical university." Her hands trembled. Her mother cried. The neighbors clapped and offered leftover sweets. And for one beautiful moment, the entire world made sense. The poor girl with a dream was going to become a doctor. She entered the campus in second-hand shoes and a stitched-up backpack, but with her head held high. Every hallway felt like a castle. Every anatomy book felt sacred. She arrived early to lectures, sat in the front row, asked questions others were too proud to ask. She was the quiet girl in the library until closing time. The one who stayed back after labs just to label bones twice? To most, she was invisible. To herself, she was finally becoming. But reality doesn't wait for dreams to settle. By the third month, her scholarship funds had run out, not for tuition, but for life. Rent was due. The fridge was empty. Her mother's illness returned stronger than before. And hospitals? They don't take scholarship letters as currency. So Sarah started working nights. First at a small tea stall, then at a bakery. Eventually, she found a job cleaning rooms at a local motel. She would return home at 3 a.m., knees aching, face pale, but she never missed a morning class. She simply stopped sleeping. She stopped eating full meals, started skipping breakfast, wore the same shoes for 2 winters. When classmates laughed in the canteen, she pretended to revise notes. But truthfully, she was too hungry to talk. Her hands shook during dissections. Her stomach growled in silent labs. But she stayed, because people like her don't get second chances. She began carrying her books to work shifts, reading between orders, listening to heart sounds on YouTube between cleaning sinks. One customer once laughed and said, "Studying medicine while scrubbing toilets? That's ambitious." Sarah only smiled. If only he knew what she was fighting for. One evening during her second year, while standing in line to donate blood to earn meal coupons, her vision blurred. She collapsed. When she woke up, she was in the student medical center. A nurse was adjusting her. The dean was sitting beside her, arms crossed. "Sarah, You're one of our brightest students. But this is dangerous. You can't burn yourself at both ends." She didn't respond, because she knew if she chose rest, she'd lose everything else. He handed her a letter. "One more incident like this, and we'll have to suspend your enrollment." The paper cut her more deeply than any blade ever could. Not because it was a threat, but because it meant her body was failing, before her will ever would. That night, she walked home in silence. Her mother was sitting on the floor, folding old clothes to sell, her breathing shallow, her fingers cold. Sarah sat beside her and didn't say a word. Her mother looked up and asked, "Long day?" Sarah nodded. But inside, a storm was breaking. She went to bed with tears soaking her pillow. The one she'd once practiced CPR on, now had just caught her exhaustion. And in that darkness, for the first time, she whispered, "Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I'm not strong enough." But somewhere inside her, the voice of the dreamer still lived. The girl who once read medical books under a dying light bulb. The one who promised her mother, "I'll become the doctor you always needed." That voice was quieter now, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. The next morning, she showed up for class again. Eyes swollen. Notebook ready. She didn't have money. Didn't have sleep. Didn't even have hope. But she had one thing left. Grit, the kind that doesn't show up in mark sheets. The kind that doesn't get applause. The kind that builds heroes when no one is watching. She didn't know that the worst was yet to come. But she also didn't know that every sacrifice was building the moment she would finally be seen. Not as a waitress, not as a dropout, not as a poor girl, but as the one who saved a life. The first time she thought of quitting, she didn't say it out loud. She just looked at her mother's medicine shelf half-empty bottles, expired syrups, and a list of prescriptions she couldn't afford to refill. Her hands trembled as she counted the last few coins in a rusted tin box. Even the tin was starting to rust, just like everything else around her. Her eyes moved from the bills to her books. She knew something had to give. Her mother had always been strong, the kind of woman who'd pretend her cough was just dust, who smiled through fevers and laughed when she could barely breathe, but not anymore. Now, her fingers were too cold to hold a spoon. Her lips had turned grayish-blue, and at night Sarah could hear her gasping from the next room. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Not even with hope? Not even with prayers? The local clinic refused to help until payments were made in full. No insurance. No charity left. One of the nurses whispered to her, "She doesn't have much time. Without oxygen therapy and full tests, you'll lose her." Sarah nodded, but inside something shattered. She left the clinic with a piece of paper that listed everything her mother needed, and not one thing she could afford. That night, Sarah walked to the hospital alone. She sat on a bench outside the emergency ward and watched ambulances come and go. So many people being rushed in with blinking machines and flashing lights. She thought, if only I had those lights for her. If only I knew what to do. But the truth was, she did know what to do. She just didn't have the power, or the papers, or the time. The next morning, she sat by her mother's bed with her textbook spread out in front of her. But she wasn't studying. She was just staring at the page, at her mother, at the ceiling. Anywhere but at reality. Her mother opened her eyes slowly and said, "You didn't sleep." Sarah smiled faintly. "Neither did you." There was a long silence. Then her mother whispered, "If you're thinking about quitting, don't." Sarah looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because I see it in your eyes. You carry the world now, but this dream, this purpose, it's yours? Don't let it go from me." But that was the thing. Sarah would give up the world just to have her mother stay a little longer. And so she made a decision, one that hurt more than hunger, more than shame, more than failure ever could. She went to the dean's office the next day, hands shaking, eyes red, and placed her ID card on the desk. "I'm dropping out, just for now." The dean looked disappointed, but not surprised. He simply said, "I hope life brings you back one day." She didn't respond, because she didn't know if it ever would. That evening she returned home with no books in her bag, just medicine. Real ones this time? Her mother cried, not out of joy, but guilt. Sarah held her hand and said, "Don't cry, Mama. I'll still study. I'll never stop, even if I'm not in the classroom." Her mother touched her face gently. "You were always more than a student. You were born to heal." And so began a new chapter in her life. The doctor without a degree, the student without a campus, the girl who refused to let her knowledge die. She worked 3 jobs now. Early mornings at a bakery, afternoons cleaning rooms, and late nights in a diner. But every spare moment between mop strokes and dish piles she was studying. Old PDFs, medical forums, online lectures played on a cracked phone screen. Her most prized possession was an old CPR manual she found in a donation box. She practiced compressions on a pillow on the living room floor, every night timing herself with a second-hand watch. She couldn't save the world. Not yet. But she could be ready for when the moment came. Even if no one believed in her, even if no one saw her, even if she was just that poor girl with too much ambition. One day, while serving tea at a wedding, a woman collapsed near the buffet. Panic spread. Sarah rushed forward, checked her pulse, tilted her neck, and gave the exact commands she'd memorized. A real doctor showed up minutes later and praised her quick response, but no one remembered her name. She went back to the kitchen, picked up a tray, and kept moving. This was her life now, invisible, but alive with purpose. Her dream had not died. It had just changed form. It was quieter, lonelier, but still burning. Inside her was a doctor waiting to be seen, and little did she know that one day in a hotel not far from here that moment would come. And this time, everyone would see. The sirens were gone now. The crowd had thinned. And Sarah stood alone outside the hotel entrance, her apron stained, her chest still, heaving from those desperate chest compressions that bought him time. Just minutes ago, he was dying at her feet. Now, he was alive. Somehow, inside the ambulance, machines beeped. Paramedics worked quickly. Oxygen flowed. But none of it would have mattered without what Sarah did first. Without her knowing exactly what to do when everyone else froze. One of the paramedics stepped out of the ambulance and looked around. He spotted her standing quietly, unnoticed. He approached her and asked, "You're the one who started CPR?" Sarah nodded hesitantly. "Yes. I think I got there just in time." The paramedic glanced at his watch. "You did. If you hadn't started when you did, he wouldn't have made it." Sarah blinked. No one had said that out loud yet. The weight of it hit her like a wave. She saved him. She saved a life. But even before she could process it fully, the hotel manager walked up behind her, furious. "What were you doing outside your work area? Do you know you left the coffee station unattended?" Sarah turned, stunned. "Sir, you're not a doctor. You could have made it worse. You put our reputation at risk." She opened her mouth to defend herself, but nothing came out. It didn't matter what she'd done. Not to him. Not to people like him. She went back inside. Back to the kitchen. Back to the dishes. As if nothing happened. But someone else had noticed. Someone inside the ambulance, who had just opened his eyes for the first time in those critical minutes. Later that night, a call came to the hotel reception. An unfamiliar voice asked, "There was a girl. She helped me find her." The manager frowned. "Sir, we have dozens of staff. She's not just staff. She's the one who saved my life." Word spread like wildfire. By morning, everyone at the hotel knew the man Sarah had saved was billionaire Adam Whitaker, owner of 3 global companies, a philanthropist and one of the most influential men in the country, and he was looking for her. Sarah didn't believe it at first. Not until the hotel director himself called her into the office, suddenly polite. "There's someone who wants to meet you." She wiped her hands, still in her uniform, and walked nervously down the corridor. When she entered the private room, it was quiet. Adam sat upright in a chair, pale but alive. His eyes met hers, soft, focused, grateful. "You," he said. "I remember your voice." Sarah stayed near the door. "Sir, I'm glad you're okay." He smiled faintly. "You're not a doctor, are you?" She hesitated. "No, not officially." "Not anymore?" There was a long pause. Then he said, "Well, you were the only one who acted, and you saved my life. That makes you more of a doctor than most." Sarah felt her throat tighten. No one had said that to her? Not in years. Certainly not someone like him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah." "Sarah what?" "Just Sarah," she said quietly. He nodded slowly, still catching his breath. Then he turned to his assistant. "Find out everything about her. Where she's from, what she needs, and why she's not wearing a white coat yet." Sarah looked down, embarrassed. "You don't have to do anything for me. I was just doing what anyone would do." Adam shook his head. "No, Sarah, you did what no one else did." He reached into a folder beside him and pulled out a card. "I owe you my life, and I intend to repay that." She took the card slowly. It felt heavy, not because of the weight, but because of the promise it held. As she left the room, the hotel staff stared at her with new eyes. But she didn't walk differently. She didn't puff her chest or flaunt her moment. She just clutched that card close to her chest and whispered, "Maybe Mama was right. Maybe this dream wasn't over." Soft piano builds. She had no idea that this single meeting would open doors she never knew existed, that it would lead. 3 days passed. Adam Whitaker was still recovering, but not just from the heart attack. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl with calloused hands and tired eyes, who brought him back from the edge of death. Sarah, he had met hundreds, maybe thousands of people throughout his career, but none like her. She didn't ask for a photo, or money, or attention. She just saved him, then disappeared back into the kitchen like it meant nothing. That meant everything. So he sent his assistant Clara to learn who this girl really was. By the next morning, he had a report in his hands. Clara flipped through the pages. Her name is Sarah Amin, age 26, born in a village hospital 3 hours away. Adam listened intently. First in her class throughout school, Clara continued. Accepted into the National Medical University on a full scholarship. Adam nodded slowly. So why isn't she a doctor? Clara hesitated. Then she showed him the next page. A photo of a man. Sarah's father. He died during her 3rd year. A collapsed roof in the factory where he worked. Left behind nothing but a pile of hospital bills and a daughter, with no way to pay tuition anymore. Sarah dropped out. Tried to work odd jobs. Tried to reapply. But everything was either too expensive or too far. She became a waitress, a part-time barista, a dishwasher. But in her spare time, she still read medical journals. still volunteered at clinics, still kept her dream alive in whatever small way she could. Adam set the file down, quiet, then whispered, "She shouldn't be serving coffee. She should be in." The next morning, Sarah got a call. She was on break behind the hotel sitting on an upside-down bucket, eating a sandwich she couldn't afford. She almost didn't answer. "Hello? Is this Sarah Amin?" "Yes. Mr. Whitaker would like to meet you again, privately." She hesitated. Her first thought was panic. Did she do something wrong? Her second thought was fear, would she get fired? But her third was curiosity. This time the room was warmer. Not a hospital bed in sight. Just Adam in a soft gray sweater, his face calm. He motioned for her to sit. "Sarah," he said gently, "I know everything now." She froze. "What do you mean?" "Everything? Your father, your medical school records, your part-time jobs." Sarah's stomach dropped. She hadn't told anyone. "You looked into me?" Adam didn't flinch. "I had to." "You saved my life?" "I had to understand why someone so smart, so capable, was scrubbing dishes instead of saving lives." Sarah looked down, ashamed. "Life got complicated." Adam nodded. "I know." He leaned forward. "That's why I want to help." She blinked. "Help how?" He smiled. "I've already spoken to the university. Your records are still valid, and they've agreed to reinstate you immediately with full tuition covered." Sarah gasped. She almost dropped the cup she was holding. "You what?" "Your seat is waiting. So's a living stipend, housing, books, uniforms, everything." Her eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that?" Adam's voice was calm. "Because I'm alive. And you're the reason." She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her chest rose and fell. Her hands trembled. Adam continued, "There's just one condition." She looked up, nervous. "Anything." He smiled again. "When you graduate, you help someone else. Someone like you. Someone forgotten. Someone with a dream and no way to chase it." Sarah nodded slowly, then firmly, "Deal." That night she packed up her tiny room, folded her old apron, taped the last of her mother's photo onto her new dorm wall, and stepped onto the university campus once again. But this time, she wasn't just a student. She was a survivor. A second chance. A promise waiting to be kept. The first morning back at medical school felt like waking from a long, painful sleep. Sarah stood outside the lecture hall, backpack clutched to her chest, her student ID hanging fresh around her neck. But she didn't walk in right away. She stood frozen, watching students much younger than her rush past with coffee cups, textbooks, and dreams she almost gave up on. Her shoes were old. Her coat still carried the faint scent of grease and soap from her waitress days. But she was here. Finally, she was here. The professor's voice echoed in the hall. "Good morning, future doctors." Sarah stepped inside. She didn't know a single face in that room. She was older than most, out of practice, rusty in subjects they had just studied last semester. But she took her seat in the last row and whispered to herself, "You don't have to be the best. You just have to finish." Weeks passed. She studied from morning to midnight, typed notes on a laptop Adam had sent her anonymously, never bragging, never calling. He was just quietly watching her rebuild her life. Some days she doubted herself, especially when lectures moved too fast, when anatomy labs overwhelmed her, when she saw students laughing with their friend groups, while she studied alone in the library corners. But every time she reached for her chest, the place where her stethoscope, now rested. She remembered the sound of Adam's heart under her hands. The moment it stopped. The second it returned? That was her reason. 3 months in. She passed her first major exam with the second highest score in class. The professor raised an eyebrow. Not bad, Ms. Amin. Where have you been hiding? She smiled politely. Didn't mention the dish pit. Or the janitor's closet where she once cried during a double shift. She just nodded and said, catching up. Meanwhile, Adam was doing his own kind of healing. He had started eating better, sleeping better, canceling meetings he used to think were urgent. His near-death experience had forced him to rethink everything. And watching Sarah fight, her way back into medicine reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. One evening, Sarah was walking back from class when she found an envelope taped to her door. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note. You'll never know how many lives you've already saved. Keep going. I believe in you. Oh, well, she smiled, then wiped away a tear. Adam never asked for recognition, never appeared on campus, never interrupted her path, but she knew. He was always there, somewhere in the background, her silent supporter. In her second semester, Sarah began rotations at the local clinic. It was there in a crowded hallway that she first wore her white coat. She ran her fingers down the name. Tag, S. Amin, student doctor? Her heart fluttered. She was no longer the girl behind the counter, no longer the girl who had to choose between food and books. She was becoming who she was always meant to be. One day, a little girl came in burned badly from hot water. Her mother was frantic. The clinic was overcrowded. The nurses were overwhelmed. Sarah stepped forward. She cleared space, took the mother's hand, gave calm instructions. Wrapped the child's arms with steady, practiced fingers. The attending doctor watched quietly. When the case was over, he said only one thing. Where did you learn that? Sarah looked up. Life. That night, she walked home with sore feet and a full heart. The sun was setting, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, hope, by the end of that year. She was top of her class, respected, relied upon, admired, but more importantly, she was becoming the kind of doctor her mother once whispered about when they couldn't afford medicine. A doctor who listened, who understood pain, who knew what it felt like to suffer in silence, because she had lived it. Every exam, every all-nighter, every setback. It all led here, to the quiet moments where she comforted patients, to the critical seconds when she stopped bleeding, restarted hearts, gave hope. She was doing it. She was really doing it. And somewhere across town, in a quiet office, Adam Whitaker watched the news. A student doctor had saved a bus driver who collapsed behind the wheel. Quick CPR, clear thinking. Zero hesitation. The name on the screen? Sarah Amin, he smiled to himself. She's ready. 2 years later, Sarah stood at the mirror in her tiny apartment bathroom, tying her white coat. This one was different. The tag no longer said student doctor. Now it read Dr. Sarah Amin, MD resident, Cardiology City General Hospital. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something bigger, pride, gratitude, a quiet, stubborn kind of joy that only comes from earning every inch of your place. Her phone buzzed. It was a reminder. Her first solo shift in the cardiac response unit. She took one deep breath and walked out the door. The hospital was buzzing, alarms, pages, rolling stretchers. But her steps were calm, her mind sharp. She passed other residents joking nervously in the hallway. She didn't need to prove anything. She had already faced the real test long ago in kitchens, in alleys and quiet nights spent crying over anatomy flashcards. Now, she belonged. 2 hours into her shift, a call came in. Incoming, male, 50s, chest pain, severe arrhythmia. History of cardiac arrest? He's unstable. Sarah grabbed gloves, checked monitors, nodded to the team. Another emergency, another life. She didn't flinch until they wheeled the stretcher in, and she saw his face. It was him, Adam Whitaker, pale, sweating, barely conscious, but alive, still fighting. Her heart skipped, but her hands didn't. "Let's go room 4, she barked. "Nitro, 2 milligrams. Get a crash cart ready, just in case." The nurses moved fast, but Sarah was faster. She checked his pupils, monitored his vitals, squeezed his hand. "Adam, it's me. You're safe. Stay with me, okay?" His eyes fluttered. A whisper escaped his lips. "No, you'd make it." Then he passed out. Sarah didn't panic. She led the team, stabilized his rhythm, monitored every heartbeat like it was personal. Because it was. This man had pulled her from the fire and then disappeared so she could rise. And now, fate had brought him back to her table. Hours later, he was stable, sleeping, breathing normally. Sarah stood outside the recovery room, watching him. Her white coat was soaked in sweat, her gloves wrinkled, but her eyes were clear. A nurse passed by. "You know him?" Sarah nodded softly. "He saved me once. Now it was my turn." The next morning, Adam opened his eyes, and there she was, by the window, reading his chart, wearing the coat he'd once dreamed she'd wear. He smiled faintly. "I told you you'd make a brilliant doctor." Sarah turned, her face calm, but emotional. "You didn't just tell me, you gave me the chance. Even when no one else did." He chuckled weakly. "Looks like the investment paid off." She pulled up a chair. "Let me be clear, Mr. Whitaker. You are not dying on my shift." He laughed, then winced, then laughed again. They talked for the next hour. About life, about purpose, about how strange and beautiful fate could be. And when the nurse returned, she found the two of them sitting side by side, doctor and patient, two survivors of very different storms. That night, Sarah walked home under the city lights. She passed the diner where she used to mop floors, the bus stop she once cried at in winter, and the alley where she'd saved a stranger whose name changed her life. Except now, he wasn't a stranger. He was her patient, her friend, and maybe, just maybe, something more. 2 weeks later, Adam Whitaker sat by the hospital window, sunlight glowing across his face. His color had returned. His heartbeat was steady, but his eyes still searched for meaning. Sarah entered with her usual clipboard. White coat, hair tied up, focused, but today her guard was lower. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Not like a patient sees a doctor, but like a mentor sees potential. He doesn't want the world to waste. "Heart looks good," she said, flipping the chart. "You'll be discharged by Friday." Adam smiled faintly. "Already planning to get rid of me?" Sarah shrugged. "We need the beds." They both chuckled, but then his voice changed. "Sarah," he said slowly, "can I ask you something? It has nothing to do with medicine?" She paused, curious, then nodded. "If I offered you a chance to leave all this behind, not because you failed, but because you're meant for more, would you take it?" She blinked. "Was this a trick? You want me to quit?" she asked. No, he replied. I want you to lead. He slid an envelope across the bed. Inside, a business proposal, a startup draft, blueprints, concepts, charts, a global foundation meant to provide urgent care to remote and poor regions with mobile tech, local training, and AI-driven triage support. Sarah scanned it in disbelief. This is massive. Adam nodded. It's been sitting idle for 3 years. I lacked the heart, the hands, the fire. He looked her in the eye. Until I met you. She looked away. This wasn't a compliment. It was a crossroads. You're asking me to leave medicine? I'm asking you to multiply it, he said. Right now, you save one person at a time. But what if you could save a village? What if you trained hundreds of Sarahs? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of every sacrifice she'd made to wear this coat. Her mother, her nights, her pain. But beneath it, a seed of something new. I need time, she said softly. Adam nodded. You have it. That night, Sarah stood on the rooftop of the hospital. The city was buzzing. But her heart? Still, she closed her eyes and whispered aloud, Mom, what would you do? Wind passed through her hair, as if it carried a memory. A voice she remembered. Real healing doesn't only come from hospitals, it comes from hearts. 3 days later, the discharge papers were ready. Adam's suitcase sat by the bed. His driver waited outside. But his mind? It was still with her. Sarah walked in, slower than usual. White coat on. Stethoscope around her neck. But her eyes? Different. Not tired. Not anxious. Clear, calm, decided. She stood at the foot of his bed. Mr. Whitaker. He raised an eyebrow. Sarah, he corrected. If we're partners now, you better start calling me Adam. She smiled, then took a deep breath. I've read every page of your proposal, she said. Twice. Adam leaned forward, and she stepped closer. I'll do it. He exhaled, a breath he didn't realize he was holding. But, she continued, on one condition. He froze. What's that? Sarah pulled something from her coat pocket. It wasn't medical. It was a photo faded, folded, worn out. Her mother, smiling, wearing a nurse uniform, standing outside a tiny rural clinic. She gave everything to help others, Sarah said. But she never got to finish what she started. Tears welled, but her voice was steady. I want our first mobile clinic to be built there. Adam looked at the photo, then at her. He didn't hesitate. It will be done. She nodded, then reached into her bag, pulled out the white coat, the one she wore through every storm. She folded it, carefully, gently, like saying goodbye to a friend. I'll still be a doctor, she whispered. Just not in a hospital. Adam stood up. Let's go then. They walked out side by side, two worlds colliding, one of power, one of purpose, but both chasing the same thing now, healing. As they exited, a nurse passed by and called out, Dr. Khan, we'll miss you. Sarah turned, smiled warmly. You'll see me again, she said. Just not here. 1 week later, in a remote mountain village, a small crowd gathered near an empty field. A truck arrived, painted in white and blue. On the side, Hopeline Mobile Clinic, #001. In memory of Amara Khan, inside the truck, a young woman in scrubs. No stethoscope, just steady hands, sharp eyes, and a heart on fire. Sarah stepped out and whispered to herself, this is just the beginning. 6 months later, the world hadn't changed, but she had. From the scorching deserts of Baluchistan to the snow-laced villages of Hunza, Sarah's name had started to spread, but not as Dr. Sarah Khan. Now they called her the girl who brings hope in a white van. She no longer wore a white coat. Instead, long sleeves rolled up, a dusty scarf, a worn-out satchel full of medicine, notebooks, and dreams. She wasn't just treating illness. She was rebuilding lives. One woman in a flood-hit village hugged her and said, "You're the only doctor who came without cameras." Another father wept when she saved his fever-stricken daughter with nothing but fluid and antibiotics delivered through a garden hose because the equipment hadn't arrived. The world was broken, but she was learning to fix it piece by piece with whatever she had. But behind every success, there were struggles. Struggle number one, trust. Some locals didn't trust her. She was too young, too bold, too different. They asked questions like, "Where is your husband? Are you even qualified? Why would a rich man send a poor girl to help us?" Struggle number two, corruption. Supplies would vanish in transit. Permits got lost. Roadblocks appeared where there were none before. Sarah confronted a regional officer once and said, "If your mother needed help, would you still hold this paper hostage?" He blinked, then stamped the file. Struggle number three, herself. Some nights she'd wake up with her mother's photo in hand, doubting herself, wondering if she was doing enough, if she had made a mistake leaving the hospital. But every time a child smiled, or a village elder called her Betty, she remembered, "This is why I chose this." And through it all, Adam stayed in touch. From his glass tower in New York, he called every Sunday, not to give orders, but to ask for advice. He started saying, "I'm not leading this anymore, Sarah, you are." She had gone from being the doctor who once begged for a job to becoming the backbone of a global health revolution. One night, in a small village near Swat, as she packed up after a long day, a voice stopped her. "Sarah?" She froze. The voice was deep, familiar, but impossible. She turned and saw someone she hadn't seen in 5 years. "Sarah?" The voice didn't belong here. Not in this muddy village, not among broken fences and hopeful eyes. Not here where she'd finally built something real. She turned slowly. And there he was, Farhan, her breath caught. The last time she saw him, he was walking away from a bus station in Lahore, a bag over his shoulder, a lie in his mouth, and tears she refused to shed. "You," she said, words brittle in her throat. What are you doing here?" He looked older, tired, a patchy beard, dust on his boots, but those same brown eyes, the ones that once made promises under rainy rooftops. "I came to volunteer," he said quietly. "Didn't know this was your program." Sarah didn't speak. Couldn't. Her mind flipped back to the long nights in medical college, to him holding her notes while she studied, to the time he said, "Someday we'll run a clinic together. Just you and me." That Sunday never came, because he left, without warning, without explanation. "I heard what you're doing," he continued. "I wanted to help. I thought maybe—" She cut him off. "Why now?" Farhan hesitated, then pulled a letter from his pocket, old, folded, edges torn. "I wrote this years ago. Never sent it." He handed it to her. Sarah didn't take it. Not yet. Her hands were shaking. He looked around the makeshift clinic, the waiting children, the empty boxes of supplies. "You turned everything we dreamed of into something real," he said, voice low. "I wasn't brave enough back then, but I am now." There was silence. Only the wind. Only the sound of children laughing behind the tent walls. Sarah finally took the letter. She didn't open it. Not yet, but her voice softened. If you're here to help, grab those water jugs. We've got work to do. Farhan smiled, nodded. He picked up the jugs, walked behind the clinic tent. But Sarah stayed still for a second, her hand over her chest. Because somewhere in the middle of this storm her past had returned, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like running from it. The sun had long disappeared behind the hills. Lanterns swung outside the clinic tent, casting warm orange shadows on the dirt. Sarah sat alone on her cot, wrapped in a faded shawl, the folded letter trembling in her hands. She hadn't cried in months. Not since her mother's last breath. Not even when she saved Adam's life with bare hands and borrowed courage. But now, one envelope, one name, one piece of unfinished history, was threatening to shatter the calm she had built. She unfolded it slowly, carefully, like it was sacred. Farhan's handwriting. Still crooked, still messy in the corners, still unmistakably his. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I failed to stay. But it doesn't mean I stopped caring. Her throat tightened. The truth is, I was diagnosed with something. A tumor, stage 3. She gasped. She read on. I didn't want you to drop your future from me. So I lied. I told you I got a job abroad. I told you I didn't love you anymore. But the truth is, I was scared, and I didn't want you to watch me die. Tears dropped onto the paper. Dark circles bloomed around the ink. But I didn't die, Sarah. Somehow, I survived. And when I opened my eyes again, I regretted everything. Every lie. Every moment I wasn't by your side. If there's still a version of the world where I can help you, even quietly from the sidelines, I'll take it. Every time. I'm sorry I vanished, but I never stopped believing in you. Farhan. Sarah didn't notice when her hand went to her lips, trying to hold in a sob. Didn't notice when someone placed a warm cup of chai beside her. It was Nurse Anila, the oldest one on her team, motherly, watchful. She sat beside her and said gently, sometimes the people who leave us are the ones who loved us most. Sarah wiped her eyes, but her heart was burning, not with anger, but grief, and some quiet, buried love that never really died. She had to think, not just about Farhan, but about the part of herself she left behind with him, a part that might deserve a second chance. The next morning was different, brighter, somehow, even with the clouds overhead. Sarah stood outside the clinic, watching children carry chairs into a shaded classroom tent. Farhan was helping Jamal fix a broken water pump. His sleeves were rolled, his hands muddy, his smile softer than before. She hadn't told him she'd read the letter. Not yet, but something in her had shifted. The ache had dulled. The questions still lingered, but the anger had begun to dissolve. Nurse Anila came beside her. You built this place with your own hands, she said, watching the bustle. But even a healer needs healing, too. Sarah didn't respond right away. But then she asked quietly, if you had the chance to forgive someone who left you, would you? Anila smiled, didn't answer, just handed her a small packet of gift wrapped in newspaper. Inside it was a stethoscope, old, used, but carefully polished. It belonged to my late husband, Anila said softly. He was a field doctor, and the kindest man I ever knew. Sarah held the stethoscope gently. Anila placed a hand on her shoulder. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over pain. That evening, Sarah walked to the fire pit where Farhan was washing rice with the boys. She didn't say much, just handed him the folded letter. He looked at it, then up at her, eyes bracing for rejection. But she sat down beside him on the wooden crate. You lied to protect me, she said quietly. But you also ran when I needed you most. Farhan nodded. I know. I regret it. Sarah looked at the flickering firelight. People here, they've survived more than heartbreak. They've survived wars, floods, hunger. She paused. I'm not the same girl you left behind, Farhan. He lowered his eyes. And I'm not asking you to be. Then she added, but I believe in second chances. For them, for myself, and maybe for you too. Farhan blinked. She stood up, handed him a clean clinic apron. Tomorrow we're training new volunteers. You're on morning rounds. He smiled. She didn't, but there was warmth in her voice. The chapter hadn't ended. It had only just begun. 2 weeks had passed since the letter, since Farhan came back, since Sarah decided not to run from her past anymore. The village had healed a little more each day. One child vaccinated. One new water line opened. One mother treated without fearing a bill. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. It was a Friday, hot, dusty, the air humming with the smell of lentils and diesel. Sarah was checking patient files when a black SUV pulled up at the edge of the village road, clean, expensive, out of place. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Children peeked from behind sacks of rice. Nurses exchanged glances. Then the door opened, and he stepped out. Adam, the same man whose lips had turned blue that day, whose heart had betrayed him in the middle of a traffic jam. He was healthier now, stronger, still dressed. Sharp, but his eyes were different, softer, more awake. He walked toward her slowly. No guards, no fanfare, just a quiet smile on a grateful face. Dr. Sarah? He said. Sarah stood, stunned. You're alive? She realized how absurd it sounded. He laughed gently. Thanks to you. He sat on a wooden bench, ignoring the flies, the sweat on his collar. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about how to thank you, and nothing felt enough. Sarah shook her head. I didn't save you for thanks. He smiled again. I know. That's why I'm here. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded plan, an architectural sketch, an illegal deed. This village, this clinic, saved my life, and I want to return the favor. Sarah unfolded the sketch. A new building, 2 stories, solar-powered, an ambulance route, lab facilities, a full-fledged hospital. She looked up, stunned. You're funding this? Adam nodded. Fully, and I've already spoken to the health ministry. We'll register it as a public hospital, but named after someone special. Sarah's heart stopped. Who? He looked at her. Not me. Not you? But the woman who inspired you. Your mother. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. She didn't cry, but her soul did, quietly, gratefully. That evening, the villagers gathered. Children clapped as banners were painted. Farhan brought tea to the workers, and Sarah stood on a stool, holding a megaphone. This clinic started with a wooden box and 3 packets of bandages. Today, we build a future. The crowd roared. And as fireworks lit up the sky, Sarah looked at the stars above, whispered under her breath, Me. I did it. Outrow, power of hope. Style closing message, life. Doesn't always begin where we are born. Sometimes it begins the day we decide to rise. Sarah lost her mother, lost her dreams, lost her love, but she never lost her. And purpose is more powerful than pain. She was just a poor girl in a crowded street, but her heart was richer than any bank account. And because she stood up, even when she had nothing, a whole village now has everything. This is the power of second chances. This is the power of forgiveness. This is the power of hope.